All right, let's dive into a really fascinating corner of Philippine law. We're going to use a real-life highway collision to guide us, and believe me, it reveals how one single wrongful act can actually send you down two very different legal paths.
So, picture this. Your property gets damaged in an accident. The other person gets charged with a crime for it. Now, do you have to sit around and wait for that criminal case to finish, which, could take years before you can even hope to get compensated? It's a question that stumps a lot of people, and the answer is actually pretty revealing about how our legal system works.
To really get our heads around this, we first have to grasp a pretty fundamental concept. A single wrongful act, say a car crash caused by someone's negligence, can create two totally different kinds of legal trouble. It's seen as both a crime against the state and a private wrong against you, the individual.
Okay, so let's call this the first road to justice. In legal speak, it's known as civil liability ex delicto. That's just a fancy Latin phrase that means liability coming from a crime. Basically, the claim for damages is completely chained to the criminal case. If the person is found guilty of the crime, then boom, they're automatically on the hook to pay for the damages.
Yeah, you can think of it like a package deal. By default, when a prosecutor files a criminal case, the law just automatically bundles in the civil action for damages. You're going after the crime and the compensation all in one go. Unless, and this is key, you specifically tell the court, hey, hold on, I'm planning to file my own separate civil case for this. But what if waiting for that criminal case to wrap up just isn't a good option for you? What if the criminal case fails? Well, thankfully, the law provides a second, more direct path for victims, and this is where the Civil Code carves out some really important exceptions. For specific things like defamation, fraud, or physical injuries, you're allowed to file a completely separate civil case. And the big one for our story today, the same goes for acts of negligence, which the law calls a quasi-delict. That's basically just a wrongful act that hurts someone else, even if it wasn't on purpose. And this is a total game changer. An independent civil action means your quest for compensation is no longer held hostage by the criminal trial. You can file it whenever. And get this, the standard of proof is way lower. In a civil case, all you need is a preponderance of evidence, which just means it's more likely than not that your claim is true. That is so much easier to meet than the proof beyond a reasonable doubt you need in a criminal case. So how does all this theory actually play out in the real world? Well, a head-on collision between two buses gives us the perfect case study to see these two roads to justice in action.
All right, here's the setup. Two buses smash into each other. San Andres, the owner of one bus, sues Supreme Transportation. But Supreme fires right back with a counterclaim, basically saying, whoa, no, it was your driver's negligence that wrecked my bus. And at the same time, Supreme goes and files a criminal case against that driver, who, in the end, is actually convicted.
And this is where things get really tangled up in legal procedure. See, under the old rules, if you didn't formally reserve your right to file a separate civil case when that criminal case was filed, you lost your chance. So the lower courts saw this, they looked at the old rule, and they threw out Supreme's counterclaim. But here's the twist. They were relying on an outdated rule. And this brings us to a major plot twist in our legal story, a huge change in the rules of court that the trial courts just completely missed, and it changed everything for victims trying to get damages.
Check this out. You can see the critical shift right here. Before the year 2000, if your claim was based on negligence, you absolutely positively had to make that reservation in the criminal case. But after the new rules kicked in, that requirement was totally wiped out for these independent actions.
The Supreme Court could not have been more clear about this. They basically said that for these specific independent actions, like Supreme's counterclaim for damages based on negligence, you don't need to make a reservation anymore. They can just proceed on their own. The lower courts had simply applied the wrong rule. End of story.
So you can file a separate case. It's an incredibly powerful tool. But, and this is a big but, there's one massive catch you absolutely have to know about. So, while there might be two roads to justice, there is only one pot of gold at the end. The law is crystal clear on this. It strictly forbids double recovery. You can't get paid for your damaged bus in the criminal case and then turn around and get paid for it again in your separate civil case. No way. And believe me, this isn't some one-off rule. The courts apply it all the time. In our bus collision case, the court sent it back down specifically to make sure damages weren't paid out twice. In another case, a civil claim was allowed to continue even after the person was acquitted, found not guilty in the criminal trial. The central idea is always the same. The actions are independent, but the final payout is not.
And that's really the key takeaway from all of this. You have procedural independence. You get to choose your path, you get to choose your timing, but you don't have financial independence in the final outcome. This system makes sure things are fair, and it prevents a victim from getting unjustly enriched by, collecting money for the same exact injury from two different court cases.
So, at the end of the day, the law gives you a choice. Do you bundle your claim with the criminal case and wait it out, or do you take the independent road? That is the big strategic question that this whole legal framework leaves for every single injured party to think about, weighing the speed and the lower burden of proof of a civil case against the gears of the criminal justice system.